The Enigma Empire had long been a shadow over the galaxy. Their ships were a constant, looming presence, their names synonymous with fear and domination. For centuries, they had expanded relentlessly, conquering system after system, leaving little but subjugation in their wake. They thrived on the chaos they created, toppling civilizations with ease, crushing resistance without mercy. To the Enigma, war was not just a means to an end, it was a declaration of their superiority, a statement that no one could challenge their might. Among the many species that had crossed their path, most surrendered quickly, their leaders bowing under the weight of the Enigma's unstoppable force. But there were exceptions. A few species had managed to hold out for a time, resisting long enough to force the Enigma into prolonged conflicts, though they ultimately fell. It was rare, however, for a race to not only resist but repel the Empire's advances. That was why, when humans first appeared on the Enigma's radar, they were barely acknowledged. Humanity was a fledgling force, new to the vast interstellar arena, and to the Enigma, they were just another insignificant upstart. But humans had been expanding steadily, quietly establishing colonies on the fringes of known space. They moved without drawing much attention, not seeking to provoke but merely to grow. This caution was mistaken for weakness, a lack of ambition, and the Enigma saw them as nothing more than a mild curiosity. That is, until the Empire's scouts began to probe human territories. The skirmishes were small at first, just testing the waters, pushing the boundaries. Each time, the Enigma expected humans to falter, to flee or surrender. But each time, they were pushed back. Human ships, though smaller and fewer in number, fought back with surprising tenacity, employing tactics that disrupted the Empire's usual strategies. The Enigma leadership took notice. They weren't impressed, they were irritated. Who were these humans to stand in the way of the Empire's expansion? The Enigma commanders ordered more aggressive incursions, sending larger fleets to crush the resistance and teach humanity its place. Yet, to their increasing frustration, the humans continued to hold the line. They never sought to escalate but always managed to fend off the attacks. And then came the message, a transmission sent directly to the Enigma's central command, broadcast across multiple channels for all to hear. "Leave our space. This is your only warning. We will not permit further aggression." It was a simple statement, calm and direct. But to the Enigma, it was an insult of the highest order. An unknown, barely notable species was daring to issue ultimatums to them? The Enigma Council met in their vast, dark chamber, the air thick with tension. It was here, in the heart of their empire, that they would decide the fate of these defiant humans. The council was a gathering of the most powerful Enigma leaders, each one a veteran of countless campaigns. They prided themselves on their strategic acumen, their ability to crush opposition before it even had a chance to form. The message from the humans was played back, and a wave of laughter swept through the chamber. To them, it was absurd. The very idea that this upstart race thought they could dictate terms to the Enigma was laughable. Emperor Zinther, who had led the Empire to some of its greatest victories, sat at the head of the council, his eyes narrowing as he listened. "They think they can warn us," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "They dare to claim sovereignty over space that will soon belong to us." Zinther had seen many like them before, species that had tried to resist the inevitable. And every single one had been obliterated or subjugated, absorbed into the Empire's ever-expanding domain. "This is not a negotiation. This is a declaration of war. We will not tolerate insolence." He stood, his presence commanding, his gaze sweeping across the council members. "Mobilize the fleet. All of it. We will show them what it means to defy the Enigma Empire." The council roared in agreement, a chorus of voices that echoed through the chamber. There would be no more skirmishes, no more testing. They would unleash their full might, and this time, they would not stop until the humans were eradicated or kneeling at their feet. It was a decision made out of arrogance, a belief that no one could stand against them. Zinther himself would oversee the invasion, confident that it would be over quickly, a display of power that would remind the galaxy who truly ruled. The message was clear, the Enigma Empire would not back down. They were coming, and they were bringing everything they had. Across the galaxy, fleets began to move, darkening the skies of the systems they passed through. Massive dreadnoughts, bristling with weapons, and smaller, agile ships designed to outmaneuver any opposition. It was an armada built for conquest, a machine that had crushed dozens of worlds, and now it was aimed squarely at Earth and its colonies. But as the NIGMA fleet gathered, humans did not respond with panic. They didn't send pleas for peace or scramble to build defenses at the last minute. Instead, they moved quietly, efficiently, and with purpose. In hidden bases on the fringes of their territory, plans that had been in place for months, perhaps even years, were being activated. There was no fanfare, no grand speeches, just a quiet readiness. Among the human leadership, there was a sense of calm that seemed almost unnerving. They had seen the NIGMA's movements, intercepted their communications. They knew what was coming. And they had prepared. On Earth, in the deep space colonies, and aboard ships scattered across human-controlled sectors, conversations were brief but filled with a steely resolve. "They think we're weak," one commander said, looking over the tactical maps. "They think they can just march in here and we'll fold. They have no idea what they're walking into." From the top levels of command to the crew members manning the defense stations, the sentiment was the same. They were ready. And they had a plan. Human ships began to take up strategic positions, but not where the NIGMA might have expected. Instead of concentrating their forces for a last stand, they spread out, creating a seemingly disjointed and random array of defensive points. It was all part of a strategy that the NIGMA couldn't see, couldn't anticipate. The galaxy watched with bated breath, waiting for the inevitable clash, expecting the humans to be overwhelmed. And then, the NIGMA fleet began its advance. It was a spectacle, a display of raw power and numbers. The dark, gleaming ships filled the stars, a swarm of death that blotted out the light as they moved forward. To anyone watching, it seemed like the beginning of the end. How could humanity hope to stand against such a force? But the humans did not waver. They had warned the NIGMA, and now the Empire was about to learn just what those words had meant. As the NIGMA ships drew closer, the galaxy could almost feel the anticipation, the tension hanging in the air. The NIGMA were confident, sure of their victory, ready to crush their defiant opponents and move on. But there was something different about this conflict, something they hadn't yet understood. Humanity wasn't fighting for expansion or conquest. They were fighting for survival. And that made all the difference. The NIGMA fleet emerged from hyperspace, a dark, ominous wave that filled the void, blotting out the stars. Massive dreadnoughts led the charge, their sleek, armored hulls bristling with weapons, flanked by countless smaller cruisers and fighters. It was a show of sheer power, a sight meant to intimidate and overwhelm. They pushed forward with cold precision, spreading out to cover the vast expanse of human-controlled space. To the NIGMA commanders, this was not a battle. It was a formality, the routine crushing of yet another insignificant species that dared to defy them. From the command decks, they watched as their forces advanced, confident smiles playing on their lips. Communications channels buzzed with mocking chatter. "Is this all they have?" one commander sneered, observing the sparse clusters of human ships on their scanners. "It's like they're not even trying." Another voice chimed in, casual and dismissive. "We'll have them on their knees by the end of the day. Prepare the containment protocols. We'll need them to manage the prisoners." The NIGMA had no doubt in their minds. This was going to be swift, decisive, and final. They launched their initial assault, targeting key outposts and defense lines, expecting a quick, crushing victory. But as their fleets moved deeper, the humans finally responded. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. A handful of human ships darted out from behind a barren moon, engaging the forward lines of the NIGMA fleet. The alien commanders barely reacted, dismissing the maneuver as a desperate, last-ditch effort. They ordered their forces to advance, intending to overwhelm the human vessels with superior numbers. But as they pressed forward, those same human ships slipped away, vanishing into the dark, as if they had never been there at all. The NIGMA commanders were momentarily confused but quickly regained their composure, dismissing it as a minor annoyance. Yet, as the hours passed, more incidents began to emerge. Small groups of human ships would appear, strike at a weak point, and then disappear before the NIGMA could regroup and retaliate. Their movements were unpredictable, darting in and out of combat zones, never staying in one place long enough for the NIGMA to mount a coordinated response. What seemed like random attacks were, in fact, calculated, exploiting gaps in the NIGMA formation, picking off isolated ships, and then melting away before the fleet could adjust. The NIGMA fleet's advance slowed, their progress stalling as they tried to get a grip on the situation. What was supposed to be a simple, overpowering sweep had turned into a series of frustrating encounters. Every time they thought they had the humans pinned down, their targets would vanish, leaving behind only confusion and scattered wreckage. The commanders struggled to make sense of it. "What are they doing?" one muttered, staring at the tactical display. "They should be defending their main stations, not dancing around like this." But it wasn't just the hit-and-run tactics that were throwing the NIGMA off balance. Their communications, once clear and steady, began to crackle with interference. Orders were delayed, misrouted, or lost entirely. Ships found themselves out of sync, their targeting systems disrupted by sudden bursts of static. Attempts to trace the source of the interference led to dead ends, adding to the mounting frustration. The NIGMA commanders ordered sweeps to locate and eliminate the jamming signals, but the disruptions continued, relentless and pervasive. It was as if the humans had found a way to turn space itself against them. The more they tried to press their attack, the more disorganized the NIGMA forces became. Their vast, imposing armada, designed to intimidate and overwhelm, was slowly being chipped away, their formations disrupted, their movements slowed. What they had dismissed as a ragtag defense was now proving to be a coordinated, intelligent resistance, and it was unlike anything they had faced before. The humans were not meeting them head-on as they had anticipated. Instead, they were controlling the tempo, forcing the NIGMA to react rather than act, dictating the terms of engagement. The NIGMA's overconfidence began to show cracks. The commanders, who had once been so sure of their dominance, now found themselves grappling with an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Reports flooded in from across the fleet, critical systems failing without explanation, supply lines being ambushed, isolated units going dark without a trace. The NIGMA's ships were being picked apart, not by overwhelming firepower, but by strategy, precision, and timing. It was as if the humans knew exactly where to strike and when. But the real shock came when the NIGMA started encountering what they had not anticipated: hidden human weapon platforms, scattered across the sector, lying dormant until now. These installations sprang to life, unleashing a barrage of concentrated fire on the unsuspecting NIGMA ships. Advanced railguns, automated turrets, and missile batteries, all strategically placed to create choke points, herding the NIGMA forces into tighter, more vulnerable formations. The initial strikes were devastating, cutting through the heart of the NIGMA fleet, causing chaos and confusion. In the command centers of the NIGMA's ships, the mood shifted from confident to frantic. "We need to regroup," one commander barked, but even as he gave the order, more reports came in, more hidden platforms activating, more ships going silent. "They're playing with us," another voice said, the realization creeping into their tone. "This was never about defense. They're leading us somewhere." The NIGMA commanders were beginning to understand, but it was too late. The humans had been waiting for this, baiting them, drawing them further into a carefully laid trap. Every move, every skirmish, had been part of a larger plan, one that the NIGMA had walked into without even realizing it. As they pushed deeper into human territory, their fleet became stretched, overextended, and vulnerable. The humans had calculated their responses down to the last detail, using the NIGMA's own arrogance against them. The NIGMA ships, once a symbol of unstoppable power, now found themselves isolated, outmaneuvered, and disrupted. Supply lines that had been the backbone of their invasion faltered as human raiders hit critical points, severing communication and leaving pockets of the fleet stranded. The once cohesive armada was now a series of fragmented battle groups, each one struggling to maintain order amidst the chaos. In the middle of it all, the humans continued to press their advantage. They had not come to fight a traditional war, they had come to dismantle their enemy piece by piece. Every step of the way, The NIGMA were being outflanked, outthought, and outplayed. And yet, even as their situation deteriorated, the NIGMA commanders refused to acknowledge the gravity of their situation. "It's a delay, nothing more," Emperor Zinther insisted, but even he could see the fear beginning to seep into the eyes of his officers. The humans were not simply defending their space. They were taking the NIGMA apart, methodically, deliberately, with a quiet, cold precision. The NIGMA had thought themselves invincible, and the humans had let them believe it, right up until the moment the trap was sprung. Now, as the NIGMA fleet struggled to regain its footing, it was clear who was in control. The battle had shifted, and the NIGMA, who had begun with such overwhelming force and confidence, were now being led deeper, pushed further into a quagmire from which they could not escape. They thought they were closing in on their prey, but in reality, they were being shepherded into a kill zone. The galaxy watched, and for the first time, it was not the humans who were on the defensive, but the NIGMA, trying desperately to find a way out of a battle they were no longer winning. The NIGMA fleet pressed deeper into human territory, their ships spread out, overextended, and scattered across the vastness of space. They had been advancing steadily, certain that victory was within their grasp, but the further they moved, the more the subtle resistance they had been facing began to intensify. The humans had been leading them, luring them in, and now the trap was about to spring shut. Without warning, the dark void around them came alive, as if the stars themselves had decided to strike back. Human ships burst out of hiding, emerging from behind moons, asteroids, and the shadows of massive space stations that had appeared lifeless until now. It was a coordinated assault, a perfectly synchronized movement that caught the NIGMA fleet completely off guard. One moment, the humans were scattered, harrying their edges. The next, they were everywhere, striking with precision and overwhelming force. Ships that had been hidden in stealth mode powered up, their adaptive shields glowing bright as they absorbed the first wave of desperate return fire from the NIGMA forces. This was not the desperate, last-ditch defense the NIGMA had expected. It was a calculated offense, one that had been meticulously planned. The human ships moved with a confidence and coordination that spoke of months, if not years, of preparation. They had chosen their moment, and now they were executing their plan with ruthless efficiency. As they engaged, new weapons came into play, devices that bypassed the NIGMA's traditional defenses, shredding through shields and armor as if they were paper. The NIGMA ships, designed to counter brute force, found themselves unprepared for the surgical precision of the human strikes. Panic rippled through the NIGMA ranks. The commanders, so sure of their dominance, now found themselves faced with chaos. "Where did they come from?" one of them shouted, but there were no answers. Orders were issued frantically, telling ships to regroup, to retreat, but the commands were lost in the sea of interference that had crippled their communications. Emperor Zinther watched the battle unfold from his command center, his calm facade cracking as the situation deteriorated. The humans were no longer running, no longer hiding. They were attacking, and they were winning. The human ships moved in waves, each one precise and deadly, targeting key vessels within the NIGMA formation. They aimed for the command ships, the carriers, the supply vessels that held the fleet together. One by one, the backbone of the NIGMA's force was cut down, their ships left drifting, powerless. Zinther had never seen anything like it. In all his years of conquest, no species had ever managed to turn the tide on the NIGMA so completely. He had thought this would be a lesson for the humans, a demonstration of their place in the galaxy. Instead, it was the NIGMA who were learning, forced to face the grim reality of their own hubris. From the command decks of the human ships, the captains watched their plan unfold, every move, every strike executed with cold precision. The new technologies they had developed, advanced stealth systems, adaptive shielding, electromagnetic disruptors, had all been deployed exactly as intended, each one playing its part in dismantling the NIGMA fleet. What had once seemed like an overwhelming force was now a scattered collection of ships, each one desperately trying to escape the death trap they had walked into. But there was no escape. The humans had planned for this, too. As the NIGMA ships tried to pull back, they found their routes blocked, their escape cut off. Human ships had moved into key positions, sealing off every possible path. The Enigma's sleek, black warships, once so fearsome, now looked vulnerable, trapped in a tightening noose. The synchronized strikes continued, each one hitting with surgical precision, disabling engines, knocking out weapon systems, leaving the NIGMA ships adrift and defenseless. The fleet that had come to crush humanity was now fighting just to survive, and it was losing. Zinther could feel the panic spreading, even through the static of the disrupted communications. He had underestimated them, just as the entire council had. "How is this possible?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. But there was no one left to answer him. His fleet was in disarray, and the humans were relentless. For the first time, he felt something he had not known in years: fear. The Enigma Empire had always been the predator, but now they were the prey, and they were being hunted down with a methodical precision that left no room for escape. The battle descended into chaos, the once cohesive NIGMA formations shattered beyond recognition. Ships tried to regroup, to rally, but there was no cohesion left, no leadership to guide them. The humans exploited every weakness, striking with a ferocity that left no doubt they had been waiting for this moment. What had begun as a confident invasion was now a desperate fight for survival, and it was a fight the NIGMA were losing, badly. On the bridge of the flagship, Zinther looked around, his officers scrambling, their faces etched with disbelief and fear. This was not how it was supposed to go. They had been sure of their superiority, sure of their victory. But they had walked into a trap, and now they were paying the price. "Pull back," he ordered, though he knew it was futile. "Regroup and retreat." But even as he said it, he could see the truth on the tactical display. There was no way out. The humans had seen to that. The final moments of the battle played out in grim silence. The human ships tightened their grip, methodically disabling the last of the NIGMA vessels. Zinther's command ship was among the last to fall, its engines cut, its weapons offline, leaving it adrift, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been a proud fleet. He watched, numb, as the lights of the human ships flickered across the display, like predators circling their prey. "How?" he whispered, but the answer was clear. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, outclassed. The humans had warned them, and they had not listened. In the aftermath, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The NIGMA fleet, once so imposing, now lay in ruins, their ships dark and lifeless. A few had survived, but there was no victory to be found here, only the cold, harsh truth of their defeat. The humans moved through the wreckage, scanning for survivors, ensuring that the battle was truly over. They had won, and they had done so on their own terms, with a strategy that had turned the NIGMA's own arrogance against them. On the human side, there was no celebration, just a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had been underestimated, dismissed, but they had proven their strength. They had shown the galaxy that they were not to be trifled with, that they were capable of defending themselves and more. Humanity had worn the NIGMA, and now the Empire's once mighty fleet was nothing more than debris, drifting in the void. As the humans prepared to return home, the galaxy watched, and the message was clear. Humanity was no longer the insignificant upstart it had once been. They were a force to be reckoned with, a species that had faced one of the greatest powers in the galaxy, and emerged victorious. But even in their triumph, there was a quiet caution. The NIGMA had been arrogant, and it had led to their downfall. Humanity would not make the same mistake. They had fought for their survival, and they had won, but they remained vigilant, knowing that this was only the beginning. The stars stretched out before them, vast and full of possibilities, and humanity was ready. They had proven themselves, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again.